Everyone see the slides? Yeah. Right. So
Yes.
we'll talk through some stuff in the slides, and then I'm going to jump to actual Excel and show some stuff in there as well. So last week then, session number 1, so I've introduced a few basic Excel functions and some of the basic functionality of Excel. So all that formatting stuff, so how we make things bold, how we adjust column widths, all that simple-ish stuff, how we can do if statements, how we can do sum functions, how we can do VLOOKUPs. So not going to go over that again at this point. I think, you know, the videos are there if you wish to look at that. Any questions about that? Everyone knows who I am, where I am. For those who don't know who I am, by the way, yeah, my name's Dean, Dean Quartermain. I'm a course leader for AAT at the Sheffield College, fully AAT qualified, and now's my time to give back, ultimately. So that's why I teach, that's why I do all these extra sessions. Big part of what I do now is all about giving back for that support I had when I was doing this. So on with this then. So what we're going to look at tonight, I had a few questions from last week when we talked about if functions and if statements, when I introduced this whole concept of being able to nest 2 if statements within each other. So I mentioned that, well, before we get into that, what am I looking to do tonight? Well, really extend some of those Excel skills into essentially what management accounting is all around, which is essentially decision making and, in most cases, summarising large sets of data to try and make some sense of that data so that ultimately managers, business owners can make informed decisions, because that's really what our job as an accountant is, to provide that information that allows people to make informed decisions that affect that business. You know, I'm quite passionate about, I really believe that to be the role of being an accountant. I don't believe what some people believe the role of an accountant is, which is to add up numbers. Yeah, that's part of it, but there's so much more to the role of an accountant than just literally adding up numbers. So things we're going to cover tonight, nested if statements. So I had a number of people reach out to me and say, Dean, what the hell's this nested if statement stuff, and is it covered in, and do we need to know it for any of the AAT exams? Well, Excel's really only covered on one AAT exam. Now, I know people have reached out to me and said, yeah, what about principles of costing at level 2? Well, yes, it's Excel, but it's not Excel, is it? It's that little simulated spreadsheet exercise that looks like Excel, but let's face it, all buttons are different. It's not actual Excel. It looks like a bit like Excel. So yeah, there's some stuff in there we need to know, but it's not real Excel. It's not using the main powers of Excel, a bit like the management accounting techniques exam. So I'm going to look at nested if statements because I've definitely seen questions on the maths exam that students have told me about that require nested if statements. So we're going to look at that. And then something that's definitely in the content for the management accounting techniques exam, pivot tables and pivot charts. Now, speak to any accountant and they'll tell you pivot tables probably the most underused or understood tool within Excel. Something that lots of accountants don't really understand. Yes, they use them, but they don't really understand them. Don't really understand how to put them together. Once you do understand the power of them, they are hugely powerful. They're a great way of summarizing data in a quick and easy to understand manner. And then the pivot charts extend on those pivot tables and give you that sort of visualization of that summarized data. So we're going to cover all that. We'll try to cover all that tonight. We'll see how we get on. As I say, if there's any questions, just literally stick them in the chat or shout up. So nested if statements then. So I mentioned last week that essentially an if statement is test two conditions. So a standard if statement looks at whether something is true or false. So it evaluates a condition. So I don't know, something like, does A equal B? And if A does equal B, we do something. Yeah. If A doesn't equal B, we do something else. Yeah. So we've almost got a condition that we test, and if that returns true, we do something. If it returns false, we do something else. Now, all the nested if statement says is, if something's true, we do something. If something's false, then we run another test to say, well, is something else true or false? Yeah, and if that's true, we do something. Otherwise, if it's false, we do something else. So my example at the bottom there, in very simple terms, says, if sales, so imagine general accounting world, we sell something, we've got a level of sales, and we might have a budget that we created in advance, which almost got a target. Yeah, so it's got some sort of target saying we'd like to sell this amount. So we can run an if statement that says, are our actual sales higher than our target? And if it is, well, we're above the target. Fairly simple to understand. However, if it's not above the target, then it must be, logically, either exactly the same number as the target or below the target. Now, a standard if statement won't cover that, would it? Because a standard if statement would say, is sales above the target or is it below the target? Well, that's great. But what happens if we want to know, is it exactly the same number as the target? So this bottom statement here with this nested if statement allows us to do that. So it allows us to say, are the sales greater than the target? Yes. If not, are the sales exactly the same as the target? And then if it's not either of those two things, it must be below the target. Yeah, so that's a nested if statement. I'll go through another example. I've got an example we'll go through in a little while. But hopefully we can bottom out this whole nested if statement confusion and just make sure we're happy with how that works. So I might just jump. So I'm going to put this slide up and then I'm going to jump from my slides into an Excel spreadsheet just to show you what some of this looks like. So what I've got is I've got a data set that's got employee names, yeah, the department they work in, what their sales were in, let's call it in a particular month, and then what their targeted sales should have been in that same month. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a nested if statement in the fifth column to understand the performance, i.e., how is it above the target? Has it met the target? Or is it below the target? And what we're going to do is, like it says on the slide, just simply compare actual sales to target, output above target, met target, or below target. Depends on whether we've above, met, or below. So I'll stop sharing the slides and just jump into the Excel spreadsheet briefly. Well, I will if I can find it. That one. So I'll just blow this up so people can see. So this is in true Blue Peter fashion, one I created earlier. So we've got employee names. I was, very original with my employee names. Yep. And we've got departments, and I've made it really easy, north, east, south, west. Sales, so the actual sales in pounds, target sales in pounds. So what we're going to do then is we're going to put a new column title there called performance. And what we're going to do is use a nested if statement to work out whether or not it's above the target, it's met the target, or it's below the target. So just going to now the great. Last week I showed you this sort of formula builder function here. Insert function, formula builder. Can't really use that for a nested if statement. Unfortunately, you're just going to have to type it. Yeah, so equals if brackets. Now it sort of tells you a little bit around what it wants you to do. So there's a logical test. A logical test, they would just Boolean values, true or false. Yeah, so it only have two values, true or false. Can't have there's no grey area in the middle. It's either black or white. So we're going to test whether or not sales is greater than the target. Yeah, so C2 greater than D2. And if it is, then put a comma after that test. Now it wants what's the value if that logical test returns true, i.e. sales are greater than the target. So if they are greater than the target, we're going to put above target. Yeah, now that's a piece of text, so it needs to be in quotes or speech marks. Yeah, another comma then of what we're going to do if it's false. Well, if it's false, we want to test whether the target is less than, whether sales is less than the target. So we're going to do C2 less than, yeah, D2. Now, if that's true, start again. If C2 less than D2, if that's true, then it's below the target. Yeah. Obviously, there's different ways you can do this. What you could do that. Oops. Oh, I hate Excel. Bear with me. Yeah. So if.
Did you just say you hate Excel?
Well, I don't. I hate it when it doesn't do what I want it to do.
We've all done that. We've all done it.
Yeah, we've all done it. Yeah. So above target, then what you could do here is just test whether they're the same number, or you can do what I just did, which was C2 less than D2. Now, if that's true, yeah, then we are below target. And if it's neither above or below, it must be exactly the same number, and we've got target met. Yep. Now, the important thing is to make sure you've closed all the brackets. Yep. So we're above target. 12,000 is more than 10,000. Yep. Now, if we just copy that formula down, we can see that hopefully Dean has done it right, and it actually looks right, which it does. Yeah. So this second row here, the sales are 8,000. Target was 10,000. We're below the target. 10,000 is 10,000. We've met the target, so on and so forth. So you can see how you can use nested if statements to almost deal with that grey space between, well, the target's met or the target's not met. Sorry, you're above the target or below the target. What happens if you're exactly at the target? Now, a standard if statement won't deal with that, would it? I'd be saying it's above or below. This allows you to look at that third sort of condition of, well, what happens if it's exactly the same number? So let me just close that and reshare the slides. Oops.
And once you've typed that in once, you can.
Yeah. So let me just go back to that. Oops. Sorry. Bear with me a minute. Yeah, so that's an important point, that once you've typed it once, as I sort of said last week when we were looking at formulas, in the maths exam, you've got 2.5 hours. You don't want to be doing this. You don't want to be typing that same thing out 10 times, do you?
Yeah.
So if we type it once, which we've done there, what you can do one of two things. You can either go right to the right-hand corner of that particular cell, double click left mouse button, and that'll copy it down to the bottom of the range, or you can literally just drag it down there, let go. Yeah.
Okay, and Bridget,
that saves you just typing it 10 times.
and Bridget asked, how many nested ifs can you have?
How many nested ifs can you have? As many as you like. Well, up to 64 actually, but you know, you're not. If you've got 64 nested ifs, it'll be unreadable. I'd come up with. I'd be looking at trying to rationalize your data so you don't have 64 conditions, but 64 is the maximum. But if you can imagine just how long that'd be quite a long statement, wouldn't it? But yeah, 64.
I just wondered if you could have more than one nested.
Yeah, you can definitely have more than one. Right, so let's just come back out of that for a minute, back to the slides, and we'll look at the next bit of the interesting things we're going to look at. So that's nested if statements. So covered that. If anyone's got any questions after tonight about that, obviously the video will be available some point tomorrow once Dean's edited it a bit. But if anyone's got any questions about that, you can reach out to me either on the group or, you know, send me a direct message, whatever, LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever. And I'm more than happy to spend some time explaining it again if need be. So what I want to move on to now then is pivot tables. So pivot tables are, as I said right at the top of the lesson, the session, they are one of the most powerful data summarization and analysis tools, I think, within Excel. They are massively powerful if used properly, and almost like lots of things, a bit like a chocolate fire guard if not used properly. It's just pointless if you don't use it properly or understand what benefit it brings you. So the headline really is a tool to summarize and analyze data, and you can create summaries of data by dragging fields into various places, which we're going to show you. So pivot tables generally have rows and columns and then values within the pivot table. So we're going to, hopefully I'm going to build something that shows you some of the benefit of this. Really useful for exploring trends in large data sets. So if you've got massive data set, now obviously tonight we're going to deal in reasonably small data sets, but if you had really big large data sets and you wanted to explore various trends within that data set, pivot tables are a quick way of summarizing the data and then visualizing it using the next thing we're going to look at, which are pivot charts. So that's what a pivot table is. How do you create one? Well, it's really that 4 steps there. Now, the 4th step is very specific to what I'm going to demonstrate, but ultimately, select the range of data, go to the toolbar at the top of the Excel workbook, insert pivot table, tell it where you want to put the pivot table. Now, the default is just on another Excel worksheet, another tab on the workbook, but you can place it pretty much wherever you want. And then you get a pivot table builder where you can drag things into rows and values and columns. Now, my example, when I do this in a minute, I'm going to drag department into rows, sales into values, and it's almost going to summarize the total sales by department. Now, I know that's simplistic, but that's a useful thing to be able to do. So I'm going to show a screenshot on the screen because I'm aware that I'm using an Apple Mac here, and the Apple Mac version of Excel looks slightly different to the Windows version of Excel. So that's what it looks like on a Windows version of Excel, one I created earlier, which will look ever so slightly different to what I'm going to create as we walk through tonight. Now, what I've got on there is almost my finishing position of a pivot table, the stuff in stuff in columns A and B. Yeah, that's the pivot table. The chart, that's the pivot chart. Now, I've almost put it on one screenshot because the bit that will look a bit different when I do this on my Mac in a minute is this chart will look slightly different. So where it says sum of sales at the top and this department drop-down box at the bottom, that won't appear on my pivot chart. It's just a slight difference between the Windows version of Excel and the Apple Mac version of Excel. Functionally, it does the same thing. It just looks a little bit different. So let's jump back into the Excel worksheet then. So then we got this, what we created earlier. Yeah. And what I want to do is now summarize this data. Now, we don't have too much data here, but and we could do this fairly easy, get a calculator out or even use our head and work out how much, what the total sales are for each department. Now, if we had that as a question, now, yes, we could get a calculator out and start adding it up, or we could create a pivot table, yeah, that summarizes that data you see on the screen by department and then totals the sales. Yeah, so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to select all of this data. Yeah, just simple as start at A1, hold down the left mouse button, drag it over all of the data. And then we're going to press Insert, Pivot Table. Now, I'm going to say never click that one that says Recommended Pivot Tables, just click Pivot Tables, because if you click the Recommended Pivot Tables, it'll give you something that you didn't want. Yeah, so click Pivot Tables, and then it'll say choose the data you wish to analyze. Well, you've already chose the data, so you can change that if you wish, but why would you? You've just selected the data. And then where do you want to put it? Do you want to put it in a new worksheet or in an existing worksheet? Now, for simplicity purposes, I'm just going to put it in a new worksheet. Yeah, so we are just going to put it in a brand new worksheet. And what we get is what you see on the screen, which is this pivot table with absolutely nothing in it. It says to build a report, choose the field from the pivot table field list. And then over on the right-hand side, got this pivot table fields, big long list. And all these 4 boxes here, filters, columns, rows, values. Now, we're going to do something reasonably simple here. So we're just going to create a simple pivot table, yeah, where we've got the departments as rows and the values being the sales. So essentially, we'll summarize this data by department and then the total sales by department. So departments going in rows and sales is going in values, and it's simply a drag and drop exercise. And now we can see that I have £25,500 worth of sales for the East Division, £22,000 for North, £19,000 for South, £22,500 for West. Yep. Now, obviously, you can change these pivot tables. So you could say, well, I'm not interested in department. I'd like total sales by employee. Yeah. So now you've got each employee and what their total sales are. Yeah. You can do this as many ways as you want. If you wanted to go even more granular than that, you could say, well, what's the total sales for the East department? And then what's that made up of? So we've got 25,500 for the East Division. It's made up £15,000 from David and 10,500 from Grace. And you can start to see where the power comes from these sort of things. So you can analyze the data quite granularly if you wish, and also have it at the high level at the same time. So you've got, if you close up all of these departments here, that's quite high level. Now, if you wanted it slightly more granular than that, you could say, well, that 25,500 is made up of £15,000 of sales from David, 10,500 from Grace. So you can start to see where the power is in these pivot tables. Yeah. Now, what we can also do, so I'll just pull it back to what it was. What we can then do is, some people don't like numbers, do they? Some people don't like charts with numbers. They almost like pretty pictures. Yeah, charts. So what we can do is we can create a chart that's linked to that pivot table. So this thing that's known as a pivot chart. So all we do is select the data in the pivot table. Yeah, and then go to the insert and just select which type of chart we want. Yeah. So I'm going to create a column chart, just a standard 2D column chart. Yeah, so middle of the screen, there's all these diff chart types. The one with the bars, essentially. Yeah, it's a column chart. Click on that. Different types. I've just clicked clustered column 2D column chart. And now we've got a chart that looks, I'll blow it up a little bit for you. We've got a chart that's looking at that pivot table. Now, if you remember my screenshot had some drop-down box at the bottom here for department and told you what this was, a sum of sales at the top. It's slightly different on a Mac to what it is on a Windows machine. I don't like the way it is on a Mac particularly, because on a Windows machine, these two things are very closely linked. So I can use this drop-down box at the bottom to say, well, actually, I'm only bothered around the performance of the East department. Yeah. So what I could do with this pivot table over here is I could say, well, I'm only interested in East and North. Yeah. So I changed the pivot table to East and North, let go, and only thing I see in the pivot chart now is East and North. So these two things are now very much linked together. Yeah, and this is just a visualization of that. Now, if I went back to what I had before, which was employer department sales, now we can start to see that what I've got in the chart there is, well, we've got the North, we've got Alice's contribution to the North here, Charlie's, you can start to see how I can build this up to visualize things in different ways. Another thing you can do, go on,
can you
sorry.
rename the chart?
Yeah. So if you just click on on that name there,
okay.
you can call this, total sales by department or whatever you want to call it. Oops.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Now, what I would probably say you'd want to do with this is put the employee, as a filter. So you might want to say, well, let's have every division. Oops. But then you might want to say, well, what do Bob's sales look like? Well, Bob sold 8,000 in the South region. Alice sold, I probably didn't set this up right, but ideally, if you've got, let me change one of these. So if we put Bob, and Bob's got some sales in the South and the North, the great thing is I change the source data, the pivot table changes at the same time. Yeah, so if I then change this to Bob, you should see, obviously, Bob's got sales now in South and North. So we can start to you know, build up a picture, a graphical picture of what's going on, as well as just a bunch of numbers. Now that's a simple example. So what I thought we'd do is we'll take a simple example, which we've got there. Well, let's look at an actual AAT question. Yeah. So what I've got on the next tab here is something that looks like an AAT question. So this is from some people that have heard of them, Acorn Live or Marzar. So this is off of one of the tasks on one of the Marzar Acorn Live mock exams for management accounting techniques, and it's just one part of a question relating to, well, pivot charts and pivot tables. So what it's saying is produce a pivot chart that shows the number of boxes packed on the x-axis, and probably helps if I give you the whole question. And the product description on the x-axis. Add a filter to the chart for week number. Add a title chart called Products Assembled. Format this. Text to bold. Font size to 10 to 14. Filter the chart to include only week 1 data. Remove any legend from the chart. 6 marks. So 6 out of 120. So it's out of 120 the max exam. So 6 marks for doing that. Sounds like quite a lot of work for 6 marks, and I would agree it probably is. But I'll walk you through what we need to do. So what we've got here is this data set here. Essentially, it's a list of assembly plants or packaging plants, type of products, the description of the products, week number, the employer who packed the boxes, and how many boxes of that particular product they packed in that particular week. So first thing I'm going to do is create well, you have 2 options. You can either create the pivot table first, yeah, or given it what it says to create a pivot chart, you can just literally create a pivot chart, which will create an underlying pivot table to go with it. Yeah. So where I showed earlier, you can create a pivot table there. Yeah. What you can also do is there's a button here to just create a pivot chart. Now it almost, if you want to create a pivot chart, that's probably a quicker way is to click pivot chart. It'll create your pivot table and a pivot chart at the same time. However, if you create a pivot table, you can create a chart that's linked to that table at some later date. That makes sense. Yeah. So I'll do it this way. Pivot table, pivot chart. Ask you which data you want. So we want all of this data, quite a bit of it. I think it's about 200 rows, something, maybe 200 rows. Quite a bit of data. Yeah, so get all of that, put it in the existing worksheet just for now. I'm going to drag this up to the top so we can see it. You tell it's been a long day.
Just lagging a little bit.
Right, so what we're going to do then, what's it asking us to do? Produce a chart that shows the number of boxes packed and the product description. So we probably want product descriptions, probably a good starting point then. Yeah. So product description on the one axis, and then we want number of boxes packed. It's probably on the values here. Yeah. So that's probably a sensible starting point. If we look at what the chart it's produced, yeah, well, that's what number of boxes packed on the y-axis, product description on x-axis. That's what we got, I think. Yeah. Close that down a minute. Yeah. Add a filter to the chart for week number. So what it wants us to do then is, oops. the week number here in the pivot chart fields, it wants us to be able to filter this data to say, well, we only want to see the stuff that's related to week 1, for example, or week 2, 3, 4. So if you just get hold of week number, drag it into filters, you couldn't insert, what are you on about? You couldn't insert it. What are you on about? Oh, yeah, I know what. Move back down a bit. There you go. All right. Put that in there. No. What are you on about? Right, bear with me. Always the fun when you do live demos. Never work, do they? Right, start again. So insert, pivot chart. Right, just to make it really easy. I didn't want to do that. Select all of this. Right, I'm going to put this on a new worksheet just because it'll just make life a little less complicated. Right, so you can see we've got pivot table on the left there and pivot chart on the right. So we're going to do product description and boxes packed. Yeah, so we've now got a chart that looks something like what we're looking for. Remember, the overall aim is to create a pivot chart that shows number of boxes packed on the y-axis, yeah, product description on the x-axis, add a filter to the chart for week number. So if I grab week number, stick it in filters, you'll see that my pivot chart, pivot table has changed over here to have a week number filter at the top where I can select weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now, important thing here is you don't need to just select one week number. So I could say, well, I want to see weeks numbers 1 to 4. Yeah. Or I only want to see week number 1. You can literally do whatever you want. Select any week numbers you like. Yeah, so it tells us it wants us to change the title of the chart. So we can literally just click on the chart title, type whatever we want. So in our example, it was products assembled. How many we've assembled in a week. Format that bold. So you can just literally click bold. Size 14. It is size 14, so that's great. And then filter this chart to only show the things that are in week 1. So obviously that's all of it. We don't want all of it. We just want what happened in week 1. And there you are. And then remove any legend from the chart. Now, removing things like legends from charts, like one option is just click the legend, press delete. That's one option. The other option, at the top of the chart, if you click the chart, yeah, there's this design area at the top. Just click on that design. And at the right, left-hand side there is where it says add chart element. Click on that. Yeah, under legend here, I've currently got a legend on the right-hand side of my chart. You can just tell it you don't want any. Just put none. It'll disappear. And there's your 6 marks. Sounds like a lot of work, but there's your 6 marks for creating your pivot chart. Yeah. Now, the great thing is, like I say, the pivot chart and the pivot table are linked together. You change this data in the pivot chart, in the pivot table, sorry, it'll impact what's in the chart. And on a Windows machine, you can change the filters in the chart and it affects the pivot table, but don't do that on a Mac, unfortunately. So I'll stop sharing that just for a minute. And share my slides again. And I will come to the chat because my chat is almost blown up. I will come to it in a minute. So that's how we can create a pivot chart. Yeah, create the pivot table, insert a chart, whether column chart, pie chart, customize its layout and style. I'll let people have a play with that. And that's the thing I really encourage people to do, is almost play with it. You can't break it, can you? What's the worst that'll happen? It'll be wrong. Yeah, and we learn a lot from doing things wrong, understanding what we've done wrong and then correcting it and doing it again. That's definitely an established learning method. So just have a play with it. So, bit of a recap then, and then I'll come to the questions because I think there's a whole load, but my chat has sort of disappeared off my screen. I can keep hearing it pinging, but I can't see it, but I'll find it in a minute. So nested ifs can be used to, well, in our example, we used it to classify performance, but ultimately it's there to test multiple conditions. So it's there to say, well, it's not more than this, it's not less than that, but it's not more than this or less than that. It could be exactly right, the same number. Well, standard if statement tests whether something is more than something or less than something. Yeah. We almost need multiple conditions. So nested if allows us to do that. Pivot tables, massively useful for summarizing data in an effective way. So I used a simplistic example there where we'd got sales by, we've basically got a load of employees who worked in loads of different divisions with loads of sales. And we wanted just to quickly say, what's the total sales by department? So I can get a pivot table to do it. There's other ways of doing it. I won't lie, it's like lots of things. There's many different ways of doing it. That's just one way of doing it. And it's probably the easier way of doing it, and the more established way of doing it. And then pivot charts enhance that data communication, don't they? Because pivot charts allow us to visualize those pivot tables. And remember, not everybody wants to see big, table of numbers. They almost want a summarized visual representation of that. That's where charts are really useful. And overall, the whole thing's very useful in finance world, so the accounting world. Certainly sales teams love reports that look like pivot tables that allow them to summarize the data by different divisions, by different salespeople, by different products. Yeah.
Can you do an exploding pie chart?
Yeah, I'll do one now. Yeah, just because.
You don't want it, do you?
Let's do one now. Let's do one now.
And then
why not?
You have got a couple of questions at the end, by the way.
Yeah, I've got. It's my thing's gone a bit mad, so yeah. So let me change this chart then.
Pie charts remind me of being a child in school.
So we can change the chart types here to all sorts of like donuts.
Yeah,
and then
donut. Look at that.
Yeah, and then you can, if I remember how to do it, you can explode it out, but can't remember. There's a way when he remembers. It's been a while since I've done this.
Oh, that's your homework then, Dean.
It is indeed. But you can do all sorts. But there's all sorts of different charts. There's there's like 2D, 3D charts, 2D charts, all sorts of different things. Why can I not remember? You see, half the problem, I'm going to be honest, half the problem is that it looks completely different on my Mac to what it would do on a Windows machine. So I'm gonna stick with that as an excuse.
Okay.
But yeah, you can visualize these pivot tables in lots of different ways. So some things lend themselves to pivot to bar charts. Some things lend themselves to line graphs. Some things lend themselves to pie charts. It depends on really what data set you're dealing with as to what the most effective chart is.
Yeah. Interesting, though.
Right, let me come out of that a minute then. Let's stay on there and look at some of these massive amount of questions, which, given my chat, has sort of blown itself up. Right, so how many nested ifs can you have? I think I've covered that one.
Yeah.
64. Yes, I do need a blue Peter badge, quite right. Yeah, so as Bridget says, yeah, have a play with it. That's really where the benefit is. Just have a play with it. What I would say is if you're struggling for example exercises, if you look on the Acorn Live website, you can download, I want to say there's 5 or 6 Excel spreadsheets related to their mock exams. You might not have the and within the files it tells you what the full question is. So you can practice on them, and you also get the answers as well. So you can can have a go and then see whether or not actually what you've done is what you should have done. So they're quite useful. Could I show how to create a function, then use round up, round down? Yeah, I definitely could do that. Probably cover it off in another session, I think. So certainly that's another thing that's definitely tested on the management accounting exams, being able to round up, round down numbers using round up and round down functions and round. So we'll definitely cover that off in another session. Just don't want to do too much too soon, if that makes sense. Can you put and into an if statement? Absolutely can. Yeah. So and or yeah, you can put those into if statements.
But do you have to put a comma after each thing?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Have maths on Tuesday. Right, you know what? Because you asked so nicely and you got maths on Tuesday, let's just do it. Right, so let's go back to an Excel spreadsheet. So let me create another spreadsheet then. So let's just bang some numbers in here. Oops, it'd help if I put a number, wouldn't it? Let's just create a bunch of very random numbers. Right, so we've got a bunch of random looking numbers. Yeah. You'll have to bear with me a little bit because I'm doing this on the fly. So let's say this is, I don't know, price, quantity, total. Yeah. Oops. Spell. Right. So let's say we've got 34 of them, 12 of these, and 7 of those. Right. So one thing we're going to definitely have to do on a management accounting exam, and indeed in every Excel spreadsheet, is a simple calculation to multiply price by quantity to get total. Yeah, so we can just do equals, in this case, A2 multiplied by B2. Yeah. Now, we're not going to type it 3 times or 2 more times. We're just going to copy it down. Yeah. Now, let's format those as pounds and pence, 2 decimal places. Just press that little comma sign there. Yeah. Pounds and pence, 1,000 separator. We'll do the same with these monetary values over here. Yeah. Now, what you might want to do is you might want to round up these numbers. Yeah. So the question may say, please calculate the total price to the nearest pound. Yeah? So you could round this up. So there's a load of functions. Yeah? If it tells you to round something up, the clue is always in the question. If it says round up, yeah, there's a function called round up. If it says round down, there's a function called round down. Yeah? So round up, yeah? So I want to round up that number. So the first thing it says is number, that number, and then the number of digits. Yeah? Now, number of digits is always a bit of a complicated thing that students get confused with. Now, what I say is just click where it says number of digits and it'll tell you. It says, no, it doesn't. Right? Oops. But round up, yeah, pass that number into there. Number of digits. If you put 0, what do you think happens?
Nothing.
It'll round it to the nearest pound.
Right.
Yeah. So it just rounds up to the nearest pound. Yeah. Anyone any idea what will happen if I put 1 in there?
No, not Scooby.
So if I put 1 in there, what do we think will happen? Let's do it. Yeah, I reckon we'll get 67,737.90. Yeah, which we do.
Oh,
Yeah. So 0 says nearest pound. Yeah.
Yeah.
1 says, well, let's round up the number to the right of the decimal place. Yeah. So 1 will say, well, I actually want it rounded to the nearest 10 pence. Round it up to the nearest 10 pence. Yeah. So 1 digit to the right of the decimal place. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the real power is the question wants you to round it to the nearest £100. Bonus point for anyone who knows how to round that number to the nearest £100.
Will it be 5?
I'll give you a clue. Yeah. 1 shifts it that way, -1 shifts it the other way. So it's probably -2.
Jesus Christ.
ooh,
Yeah. -2 shifts it 2 to the left, 2 numbers to the left of the decimal place and round it there.
My God.
Yeah. So if you're rounding up or rounding down in the exams, you need to remember where the decimal place is and how and whether you want to round it to round the numbers to the right of the decimal place or to the left of the decimal place. Yeah. You can do exactly the same thing with round down. Yeah. So just going to copy, basically do the same thing again. Yeah. Round down that number, 0, we'll just round it down, won't it? Yeah. So it'll almost ignore the pence and round it down to the nearest pound.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now if I do 1 there to round it down to the nearest 10 pence, so it'll become £67,737.80.
Yeah.
And if I get really clever and do like -2, it'll round it down to 67,700. Yep. And then the final function that in that sort of array of functions is just a standard round function. Yeah. So that'll just round that. If I put 0, it just rounds it. Standard rounding. Yeah. Just absolute standard up or down, mathematical rounding. Yeah.
Got you. Yeah.
So it's just absolute mathematical rounding, but it's to the nearest, it's to whatever number you want to do. So if I do -2, it will round it mathematically, but we will get 67,700, won't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. But if I did round it to 1, yeah, then we're going to get £67,737.90. So round is just absolute mathematical rounding. It don't go up or down, whereas this always goes upwards. Doesn't matter what the number is, it'll always go upwards. This will always go down. That uses standard mathematical rounding. So the most important thing is to remember, almost if you put 0 in here, it's just going to round base, just round the number up or down. 0 is where that decimal place is. Yeah. If you want to round to nearest 10p, 1 to the nearest 1p. So say it was a 3-digit number and you wanted its nearest pence, 2, would round it to the nearest pence. And then you can do, if you want to shift the other way and round, to the nearest £10, £100, £1,000, so if I did -3, it would round to the nearest £1,000. Yeah.
Yeah. So to the left is to a minus and to the right is a plus.
Absolutely that.
Yeah.
Dean, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course can.
When you've got price times quantity and your answer is going into, say, C2, could you put a round function so that it happens at the same time as your multiplication?
Absolutely, yeah. So just literally wrap the whole function. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So wrap that multiplication. Yeah, that becomes the number. So just round that to however many decimal places you want to round it to. So let's say we wanted it to the nearest £100, just minus. Nearest £10 even, -1, and round it at that point. Yeah, you'd absolutely do that.
Oh wow, thank you.
Yeah. Because all that's required for this function is a number, and obviously A2 times B2 does equate to a number. So yeah, you can definitely do that. And if you were doing it, commercially out in the commercial world, that is what you'd do. You'd round it at that point. You wouldn't almost have the number, then another column with it rounded. You'd just round it in that column, wouldn't you? So yeah, you can absolutely do that. So hopefully that's answered that question. Wherever my chat's disappeared to. I can't find anything. I do hate Teams, by the way. Can I just put that out there?
I'm not saying anything.
What if the function in cell C3 to C4 needs to be rounded? Can it have 2 arguments? So C3, C4. Oh, right. So what if you wanted to sort of add them together and then round it? I'm guessing that's what you're asking. Yeah. So yeah, you can almost do round. It needs to be one number. So if you wanted to add them two together, you could do the sum of. Ultimately, you could do the sum of all of those, the sum of these, or just that plus that, and then round the sum of those numbers to however many decimal places you wanted to do. Yeah, you can definitely do things like that. Ultimately, the round or round up, round down takes one number. Yeah. So if you want to add some numbers together, you almost need to do that bit. But it can't take multiple. So you couldn't do round. For example, this wouldn't work. So if you did round C2, C3, that won't work. Yeah, it almost would, but it would create 2 different answers. You know what I mean? It's created you 2 different, not just one number. Right. We come out of there in a minute. See what any more questions. Right. Yeah. Hopefully that that covers off that bit. Any questions from anybody? More than happy to answer any questions, and I've got all the time in the world. If you know me, I work till 100 hours a week anyway. So what's another hour?
I'm just a little bit excited to go and play.
Yeah, well, that's that's really what it's all about, is almost trying to encourage people to go and have a play with it, because I think I've taught accounting and I've taught Excel for a good number of years at lots of different levels, university level, postgraduate level, AAT, and I think generally people are scared about those things they don't understand, and I think that and the great thing about Excel is, I'm not going to say everybody, but lots of people have got it installed on the computer. Let's just go and have a play with it. Let's just go and have a go. Yeah, what's the worst?
Well, Max don't. Mine hasn't.
What's the worst that'll happen? It just won't work. It just won't do what you want it to do. But let's go and have a play with it. Let's download some of those Acorn Live Mars examples, which give you the questions. And if anyone can't find them, just reach out to me and I can send them you. Almost gives you the question and you've got the answer. So you know what they're looking for. You know what the question is. Have a go. If you don't get it right first time, look at the answer. The answers have got all the formulas in. So you can see, right, I forgot to do it. I forgot that bracket there, or I forgot this comma here, or, I did +1 instead of -1 for me roundup, and that's why it don't work. Just have a go. Yeah.